Hey team, Dr. Jake Gordy here, and in this video and the next few videos, I'm going to be discussing dementia. And in my later videos, I'll be doing a deeper dive into the most common dementia, which is Alzheimer's disease. On the slide, I've depicted two of the most common forms of dementia. Over here, we have vascular dementia. This is a brain scan, and in it, we can see little disruptions to the blood flow to the brain. And that's vascular dementia. It's the buildup of disruptions to the blood supply of the brain as you age, which causes the dementia symptoms. Now, over here, we have one of the most famous slides in history. This is Alois Alzheimer's, the discoverer of Alzheimer's. This is one of his slides showing a histological hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, and that is an amyloid plaque. But I am getting way ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning by answering this question here. What is dementia? And it's actually a bit more of a complicated definition than you might expect. Dementia is an umbrella term for a group of diseases which cause a progressive decline in cognitive ability. So in other words, it's not describing a disease, it's describing a set of related symptoms to do with the function of our brain. And actually there are many diseases that can contribute to dementia, and dementia is this umbrella term that describes the symptoms of a reduction in cognitive ability. But what is cognition and cognitive ability? Well, really, it's intellectual functions, and they're quite diverse. So perception and attention, seeing and noticing and concentrating, that is a cognitive ability. The formation of knowledge and memories, and also the ability to recall those memories, that is a cognitive ability. Judgment, evaluation, decision making, which can all be summarized as behavior, that is a form of cognition. Problem solving and comprehension, sort of the computational aspects, as well as language, the production of language, the understanding of language. All of these are forms of cognition. And so dementia is the decline of one or more of these forms of cognition as we age over time, right? So we see a progressive decline in one or more of these things. Now, the different dementias often affect different cognitive abilities at different rates. And so that's where we get sort of symptomatic differences between the dementia types. So diagnostically, we consider dementia as one group, and we consider movement disorders, progressive age-related movement disorders, as a different group. They're diagnostically very similar, separate. They're diagnostically very separate. Two famous movement disorders. One is motor neuron disease, which Stephen Hawking famously has, and another one is Parkinson's disease, which Michael J. Fox, the wonderful actor and charity organizer, and the things he's done for research is amazing. The wonderful human being Michael J. Fox has Parkinson's disease. But as we can see with both Stephen Hawking and Michael J. Fox, they don't have a decline in their cognitive abilities. They've got decline in their movement. And that's why they're called movement disorders. So separately, diagnostically, we consider these separate diseases. However, pathophysiologically, that may not be the case. So patho means bad, and physiology describes the molecular process, cellular processes, and the tissue processes that make up a human body. So pathophysiologically describes the bad, the disease-related physiology. What is fundamentally causing that disease? So pathophysiologically, dementias and movement disorders are much more highly related. They're not distinct separate circles on the Venn diagram. There's huge overlap. And that's because often they're both caused by neuronal death and dysfunction. So they're called neurodegenerative diseases because they are both associated with the progressive death of neurons and dysfunction of neurons. And in fact, the pathophysiology is sometimes identical. An example is there is a genetic mutation that causes a frontal temporal dementia, which is dementia of the frontal lobe that affects our behavior. That exact mutation can also cause motor neuron disease in our motor cortex and kill the motor neurons and affect our ability to move. So the same gene, the same mutation, the same pathophysiology is causing two diagnostically distinct diseases. But the critical thing there is the pathophysiology greatly overlaps. So let's jump into dementia. What are some examples of dementia? I've sort of alluded to a couple. So the biggest proportion, the vast majority of dementias is an Alzheimer's disease dementia. That's 60 to 70%. Around 16% are vascular dementia, but what we will learn in the coming slides is that these numbers are very approximate and probably quite inaccurate, because what we're now discovering is a huge proportion of Alzheimer's disease sufferers also have vascular dementia, right? So actually what we're now beginning to learn and understand is that these dementias are not separate bubbles, they're hugely overlapping, and so putting any number, any percentage on any one dementia isn't quite an accurate way to approach the diagnostic makeup of dementias. So we have vascular dementia, then we have Lewy body dementia. This refers to a particular histological hallmark that we can see in the brains of these patients. And it makes up around about 7% of dementia. And then we have frontal temporal dementia making up about 2%. And then the tail continues. There is numerous numbers of very rare forms of dementia, often caused by rare mutations or head injuries or rare events going on. So diagnostically, these dementias are often a little bit distinct. So Lewy body dementia, we might say one of the prominent symptoms is a disruption in perception and attention. And even one of the hallmarks of it is getting hallucinations, which is sort of a perceptual change going on there. Alzheimer's disease, one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease is memory problems, the inability to create new memories and also the struggle to recall previous memories, right? And frontal temporal dementia, which affects our frontal lobe, is often associated, and our temporal lobe, of course, is often associated with behavioral effects, understanding social environments and behaving appropriately in those social environments. So diagnostically, there's some of the hallmarks of those famous dementias. Vascular dementia isn't here because it's caused by little blood clots and little bleeds that continue to build up over time in our brain. And so often the symptoms of that disease depend on where those clots and bleeds are within the brain. So it can be quite a variable form of dementia when it comes to symptoms. However, so pathophysiologically, this is what I want to get into. So the disease processes undergoing on each of these forms of dementia are hugely overlapping. And we're now understanding these overlaps might be massive beyond what we expected. So, some studies report up to 70% of Alzheimer's disease on post-mortem investigation also have vascular dementia. So we can see that pathophysiologically, there's actually a lot going on. And it seems that some of the molecular processes that cause Alzheimer's disease may also cause vascular disease, right? So, and vice versa. So they start to feed back to each other. So pathophysiologically, it's often not helpful to think of some dementias as really unique, isolated dementias. Now, the one exception to that is there are some genetic dementias. Most dementias that occur do not have a genetic basis for their dementia. It's often what we call sporadic. So the vast majority of Alzheimer's disease is sporadic dementia. The vast majority of vascular dementia is sporadic. Other dementias do often have a higher genetic component, such as frontal temporal dementia and motor neuron disease, which isn't a dementia. But even then, they still have quite a high sporadic proportion within that dementia as well. So it's often, except for those very more rare direct genetic dementias, such as Huntington's disease, which you might have come across, except for those very rare genetic diseases, it's not helpful to think of these dementias as a really pure form of their dementia. Often it's a very mixed dementia. So often Alzheimer's disease patients will have Lewy body disease, and often Lewy bodies, which are a histological hallmark, will also have the histological hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. Similarly with frontal temporal dementia and motor disorders. And again, those motor disorders and frontal temporal dementia often overlap as well. Now, I might be overstating the overlap with this diagram. It's just sort of a pretty way to visualize it. Some of the dementias might be a bit more distinct than others. But a key thing there is that the pathophysiological processes going on are sometimes mixed. And I'll give you a really classic example. So there are these things called brain banks, and it's where a group of scientists and doctors work really closely with the families and patients who have dementia, and they will talk to them about possibly donating their brain to help us understand dementia more, which will help us develop drugs to hopefully fight off this condition as much as possible. Now, so when the patient dies, we collect their brains and these go into a brain bank, and then you can apply to get access to some of the tissue to do your research. And then once you do your research, you can start to improve our understanding of dementia, right? Now, if me and colleagues of ours would apply, and we would ask for something like 40 sections of brain from healthy people and 40 sections of brain from Alzheimer's disease. And what we would invariably find is that all the brain sections have some form of pathology going on in there. Even in our cognitively normal patients, there would be some of what we would consider histological hallmarks of dementia. And in our Alzheimer's patients, they would have all sorts of other forms of dementia processes going on in there, particularly vascular dementia, but they would also have some of these other things going on, like Lewy body dementia, and TDP mislocalization, which is famous in frontal temporal dementia. So the key message there is that pathophysiologically, it's kind of helpful to imagine that there are a lot of pathological processes going in to any one person with dementia. And often it is not a pure form of dementia. Very rarely will you only see Alzheimer's pathology in a brain. There'll be other stuff going on in there. Now, sometimes the symptoms and the biomarkers and all the tests that we can run clinically, which aren't great to be honest, in generating 100% diagnoses. In fact, they often say Alzheimer's disease can only be 100% confirmed post-mortem. So often the symptoms are so mixed and some of the biomarkers are so mixed that we end up just diagnosing mixed dementia. And we describe the person as having a mixed dementia, which is a mixture of potential diseases that can all contribute to symptoms which come under the umbrella term of dementia. So what this means diagnostically, if we have a look at those attributes of cognition, and I put each dementia in a specific box on these cognitive abilities that are affected by each dementia, what we realize is it's actually much more variable story. So Lewy body dementia probably has some language issues, some problem solving issues, particularly as diseases progress. And so really when we describe the symptoms of any one dementia, you should just consider that as some of the core symptoms where there might be a lot more peripheral symptoms going on. And in fact, when you talk to the family members of people with dementia, they often describe that each dementia person is experiencing dementia in their own way. And sometimes symptoms are very varied between two people with the same diagnoses. So Lewy body dementia and frontal temporal dementia might look like, yes, frontal temporal dementia is most commonly associated with behavioral changes, but we will see all these other symptoms going on, and it depends on the patient. And that's because pathophysiologically there's a lot of different stuff going on behind the scenes. And Alzheimer's disease, yes, it starts with a memory deficit. That's typically what it's famous for, but it affects all sorts of other functions, cognitive functions going on. So the take-home messages from this video are: dementia is an umbrella term that describes symptoms of cognitive decline. It's not a specific disease. And the pathophysiology of dementias and neurodegenerative movement disorders are complex and overlapping. And lastly, because of the mixed pathophysiology, symptoms vary widely, and diagnoses can be very approximate. So you might be diagnosed with one dementia and then on postmortem it might turn out to be a different dementia, for example. And that is happening more and more. Brilliant. So thanks, team. And up next, we're going to dive into the discovery of Alzheimer's disease, sort of the first well-defined neurodegenerative disease.